For centuries, money has controlled the world. Wars have been fought over it, economies have collapsed because of it, and entire nations have been shaped by who controls it. Right now, the US dollar is the most powerful currency in the world. Countries trade with it, businesses rely on it, and governments store it as a reserve. But what if that changed? What if a new form of money replaced the dollar? What if Bitcoin, a currency that isn't controlled by any government, became the new global standard? This idea sounds impossible to most people. But not too long ago, people said the internet would never replace newspapers. They said online shopping would never beat physical stores. Now both of those things are part of everyday life. So could Bitcoin actually replace the US dollar, or is it just a digital experiment that will never truly take over? To answer this, we need to look at how money really works. Most people never think about how money is created. They work, get paid, spend, and save, but they don't ask, what gives money its value? Right now, the US dollar's value comes from trust. Governments, businesses, and people believe the dollar will hold its value. But here's the problem. Unlike Bitcoin, the US government can print unlimited dollars. Every time new money is printed, the value of existing dollars goes down. This is called inflation. Think about what you could buy with $100 a few decades ago compared to today. The same $100 doesn't stretch as far, because inflation eats away at its value. Bitcoin is different. It has a fixed supply. Only 21 million Bitcoin will ever exist. That means no government can print more, no central bank can manipulate it, and no single entity controls it. That's why some people believe Bitcoin could be the future of money. But let's be realistic. Bitcoin is still extremely volatile. One day it's worth $60,000 per coin. The next month, it crashes to $30,000. That kind of price swing makes it hard for businesses to trust it as a stable form of money. Compare that to the US dollar. Yes, the dollar loses value over time, but it doesn't jump or crash overnight like Bitcoin does. That's why most countries still prefer to trade in US dollars. But here's where it gets interesting. Bitcoin is slowly gaining acceptance. Countries like El Salvador have already made Bitcoin legal tender. Major companies like Tesla, PayPal, and Microsoft accept Bitcoin for transactions. Even banks, which once ignored or laughed at Bitcoin, are now offering services around it. So while Bitcoin isn't replacing the US dollar yet, it is becoming harder to ignore. One of the biggest reasons people believe in Bitcoin is decentralization. Right now, banks and governments control how money moves. If you want to send money overseas, banks charge fees and can delay transactions. If you try to withdraw a large amount of cash, banks can question you or even block the transaction. With Bitcoin, there's no central authority. Anyone, anywhere can send money across the world in minutes without a bank. That's a huge shift. And for people in countries where the government controls the currency too much, Bitcoin gives them financial freedom they never had before. Imagine living in a country where your money can be devalued overnight. This has happened in places like Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and Argentina. People woke up to find that their life savings were suddenly worth nothing. But Bitcoin can't be manipulated like that. That's why many people in struggling economies are adopting Bitcoin. Not because they think it will make them rich, but because it protects their money from collapsing banks and corrupt governments. So what's stopping Bitcoin from becoming the world's main currency? There are three big challenges. First, government resistance. Right now, most governments don't want Bitcoin to take over. Why? Because governments control traditional money. If Bitcoin replaces the dollar, governments lose power over the financial system. That's why some countries, like China, have banned Bitcoin mining and transactions. They fear that Bitcoin could weaken their ability to control the economy. But the more governments try to ban it, the stronger Bitcoin seems to get. Because Bitcoin isn't controlled by any country, no single government can fully stop it. The second challenge is adoption. For Bitcoin to truly replace the dollar, millions of businesses and people need to use it. Right now, most people still don't understand Bitcoin. They see it as a risky investment, not everyday money. And let's be honest, it's not easy to use. If you want to pay someone in Bitcoin, you need to know about digital wallets, private keys, and blockchain technology. Compare that to a simple credit card transaction. Until Bitcoin becomes as easy to use as traditional money, it will struggle to replace the dollar. The third challenge, stability. Bitcoin's price moves too much, too fast. If you get paid in Bitcoin today but it loses 30% of its value next week, how can you budget? That's a major problem for businesses. People want stable money they can rely on, not money that fluctuates every day. That's why even crypto investors admit that Bitcoin may not fully replace the US dollar. Instead, Bitcoin might become a digital asset like gold, a store of value rather than daily spending money. But here's what we need to remember. Bitcoin is still very young. The internet took decades to fully transform industries. Right now, Bitcoin is going through the same growing pains. It's still early and we don't know exactly how it will evolve. What we do know is this. Bitcoin is challenging the traditional financial system in ways we've never seen before. And the question is not just whether Bitcoin will replace the dollar, but whether the financial world is ready for a money system that isn't controlled by governments at all. This is just the beginning. Next, we'll break down what happens if Bitcoin continues to grow, how governments are responding, and whether a full transition from the US dollar to Bitcoin is even possible. If you're still watching, that means you're serious about understanding how money is changing. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what's coming next will change the way you see the future of money. Let's continue. Bitcoin has already challenged the traditional financial system in ways no other currency has before. It's independent, it's not controlled by any government, and it has a limited supply, unlike the US dollar, which can be printed endlessly. But if Bitcoin is going to replace the dollar, the question is, how would that even happen? Would the world just wake up one day and suddenly stop using dollars? Would the government willingly accept a currency they can't control? Let's break down what would need to happen for Bitcoin to actually take over. For Bitcoin to become the world's main currency, 3 things need to happen. First, Bitcoin must become more stable. Right now, Bitcoin's price moves too fast. One week, it's worth $50,000 per coin. The next week it drops to $30,000. That kind of instability makes businesses nervous. If a company accepts Bitcoin today, but its value drops tomorrow, they could lose millions overnight. No company wants that kind of risk. That's why most businesses still prefer the US dollar, because even though the dollar loses value slowly over time, it doesn't crash overnight like Bitcoin can. For Bitcoin to truly compete, it needs a way to stay stable. That's why some experts believe that stablecoins, cryptocurrencies tied to a stable value, might play a bigger role in the future. Because if Bitcoin remains too volatile, it will be difficult for large corporations and governments to trust it as their main currency. The second thing that needs to happen, mass adoption. For Bitcoin to replace the dollar, millions of people and businesses need to start using it. Right now, only a small percentage of the world actively uses Bitcoin for daily transactions. Most people still see Bitcoin as an investment, not money. Think about it. When was the last time you bought groceries, gas, or clothes with Bitcoin? Probably never, because most businesses still don't accept it. Even though companies like Tesla, PayPal, and Microsoft are slowly integrating Bitcoin, it's still far from replacing the dollar in everyday life. For Bitcoin to take over, it needs to become as easy to use as cash or credit cards. Right now, Bitcoin transactions can take several minutes to confirm. Compare that to a simple tap of a credit card, which is instant. Until Bitcoin becomes fast, cheap, and convenient to use for everyday purchases, most people won't switch. The third and biggest challenge, government resistance. Governments do not like the idea of losing control over money. The US dollar gives the American government power over the global financial system. Right now, countries trade oil in US dollars. They store US dollars in their central banks. The US can sanction countries by restricting their access to the dollar. If Bitcoin replaces the dollar, governments lose that power. That's why some countries like China have already banned Bitcoin mining and transactions. They don't want a currency they can't regulate. Other governments are trying a different approach. Instead of banning Bitcoin, they are creating their own digital currencies, called central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. The idea is simple. If people want digital money, governments will create their own version, one they can still control. If CBDCs become widely used, Bitcoin's ability to replace traditional money becomes even harder, because most people won't switch to Bitcoin if they already have a digital currency backed by their government. So, if Bitcoin has all these challenges, does that mean it will never replace the dollar? Not necessarily, because history has already shown us that money systems can change. There was a time when people thought gold was the only real form of money. Then paper money came along and replaced it. Then credit cards and digital payments started replacing cash. Now Bitcoin is here, and it's growing. It doesn't have to replace the dollar overnight to become powerful, it just has to keep gaining acceptance over time, and that's exactly what's happening. More businesses are starting to accept Bitcoin, more governments are exploring how to integrate it, more people are using it to store value instead of cash, and if this continues, Bitcoin doesn't have to fully replace the dollar, it just has to become a global alternative, because once enough people trust it, the financial system will have to change. Next, we're going to break down what happens if Bitcoin keeps growing. What does the future look like? What industries will Bitcoin disrupt? And will governments eventually be forced to accept it? If you're still watching, that means you're serious about understanding how money is evolving. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what's coming next will shape the future of finance. One of the biggest things Bitcoin disrupts? Banks. Right now, banks control how money moves. They charge fees for transfers, loans, and transactions. But with Bitcoin, you don't need a bank. You can store Bitcoin on your phone, on a hardware wallet, or even memorize your private key. That means you have full control over your money. No middleman, no bank approvals, no delays. That's a major shift in power. Because if more people store wealth in Bitcoin instead of bank accounts, banks will lose billions. That's why some of the biggest financial institutions are trying to adopt Bitcoin rather than fight it. Companies like Fidelity, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs now offer Bitcoin-related services. They see where this is heading and they don't want to be left behind, because if people start using decentralized money, banks become less necessary. Bitcoin also changes the way we invest. Right now, if you want to invest in stocks, bonds, or real estate, you usually need banks or brokers to manage the transactions. With Bitcoin, you can send millions of dollars across the world without approval from anyone. No middlemen, no waiting days for transactions to clear. No excessive fees. This is why some investors see Bitcoin as the future of global finance. If large businesses and governments start holding Bitcoin as a reserve, it could become one of the most valuable assets in the world. That's why companies like Tesla, MicroStrategy, and Square have already moved billions of dollars into Bitcoin, because they see it as a hedge against inflation and a way to store value outside of traditional financial systems. But let's be realistic. If Bitcoin keeps growing, governments won't just sit back and watch, they will try to regulate and control it. Some countries might ban Bitcoin outright, others might heavily tax transactions to discourage people from using it, and some might create their own digital currencies to compete with it. The real question is, can governments actually stop Bitcoin? The answer is complicated. Because Bitcoin is decentralized, no single government can fully control it. Yes, they can make it harder to use, yes, they can restrict businesses from accepting it, but as long as people have internet access, they can still send, receive, and store Bitcoin. The only way to truly stop Bitcoin would be to shut down the entire internet, and that's never going to happen. So, what's the most likely scenario? Bitcoin doesn't fully replace the US dollar overnight. Instead, it coexists alongside traditional money. More countries start recognizing Bitcoin as an asset. More businesses accept it as a payment method. More people store wealth in Bitcoin instead of cash. Over time, Bitcoin becomes so valuable and widely used that governments can't ignore it anymore. They'll be forced to either regulate it or embrace it. And when that moment comes, the financial system will never be the same again. Next, we'll discuss what you can do to prepare for this shift. If Bitcoin is the future, how can you position yourself to benefit? Should you invest in Bitcoin now, or is it already too late? And what risks should you be aware of? If you've made it this far, that means you're serious about understanding the future of money. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because in the next section, we're going to break it all down. Let's continue. Bitcoin has already changed the way people think about money. It's no longer just a strange internet experiment. It's an asset that governments, businesses, and investors are taking seriously. So the real question is, how do you prepare for this shift? If Bitcoin continues to grow, how can you position yourself to benefit? And what are the risks that could still derail its future? Let's break it down. First, let's talk about who is already preparing for a Bitcoin future. Some of the wealthiest people in the world are already moving their money into Bitcoin. Elon Musk's Tesla bought over $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, has called Bitcoin the future of global finance. Even large hedge funds and investment firms, which once ignored or mocked Bitcoin, are now allocating part of their portfolios to it. Why? Because they understand something that most people don't. Bitcoin isn't just a way to make quick money. It's a hedge against inflation and a long-term store of value. Just like gold was used in the past, Bitcoin is now being seen as digital gold. Governments can print more money, but they can't create more Bitcoin. That's why wealthy investors are accumulating it now, before it becomes even more valuable. So, should you invest in Bitcoin? That depends on what you believe. If you think Bitcoin is just a passing trend, then no, you shouldn't. But if you believe that the world is moving toward digital assets, then having at least a small amount of Bitcoin in your portfolio could be a smart move. Here's the thing. Bitcoin has had huge price swings. Some people panic when it drops 50% in a short period. But long-term investors don't worry about the short-term dips. They focus on where Bitcoin will be 10, 20, or even 30 years from now. Because the truth is, Bitcoin's price has always recovered from crashes and gone on to hit new highs. If you decide to invest, here's the smartest way to do it. 1. Don't put all your money into Bitcoin. Bitcoin is still a new and evolving asset. No matter how promising it looks, you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. Most smart investors put only a small percentage of their portfolio into Bitcoin, so if it fails, it doesn't ruin them. But if it succeeds, that small investment could grow into something massive. 2. Use the dollar-cost averaging method. Instead of putting all your money in at once, buy a small amount every week or month. That way you don't have to worry about timing the market. Over time, your average cost will even out, and you won't be stressed about short-term price swings. Many successful Bitcoin investors use this strategy to build their holdings over years, not overnight. 3. Store your Bitcoin safely. If Bitcoin becomes a major global asset, security will become even more important. You don't want your Bitcoin sitting on an exchange that can be hacked. Use hardware wallets or cold storage to protect your Bitcoin from online threats. Remember, Bitcoin gives you full control over your money, but that also means you are responsible for keeping it safe. Now let's talk about the risks. Because while Bitcoin has a lot of potential, it's not guaranteed to succeed. There are still major obstacles that could slow down or even stop its growth. One of the biggest risks? Government crackdowns. If governments feel threatened by Bitcoin's rise, they could make it extremely difficult to use. We've already seen this in China, where Bitcoin mining was banned. Other countries could follow, making it harder for regular people to buy or sell Bitcoin. But here's the interesting part. Every time a country tries to ban Bitcoin, the demand for it only seems to increase. Why? Because people see that governments don't want them to have full control over their money. That just makes Bitcoin's mission even more important. Another risk? Technology improvements. Right now, Bitcoin has limitations. It's slower than traditional payment systems like Visa or MasterCard. It consumes a lot of energy to run its network, and its transaction fees can be high during busy periods. If Bitcoin doesn't evolve, new cryptocurrencies with better technology could replace it. That's why Bitcoin developers are constantly working on upgrades to improve its speed, efficiency, and cost. If Bitcoin keeps evolving, it has a better chance of staying relevant. But let's step back for a moment. Even if Bitcoin never fully replaces the US dollar, it doesn't have to, because Bitcoin doesn't need to destroy the dollar to succeed. It just has to become a global alternative. And that's already happening. Governments are recognizing Bitcoin, major companies are accepting it, investors are holding it as a digital store of value. The financial system is changing, and Bitcoin is a big part of that shift. So what should you do? That depends on whether you want to watch the shift happen or be part of it. Bitcoin isn't just about making money, it's about rethinking the way money works. If you're still watching, that means you're serious about understanding this movement. So here's what you should do next. Keep learning. Stay informed about Bitcoin's growth. Decide if you want to invest, and if so, do it wisely. Think about how digital money will impact the future, and your own financial future. The world is moving toward a new financial system, and in the next few years, we'll see who is prepared and who gets left behind. If you found this video valuable, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss insights on finance, Bitcoin, and the future of money. And let me know in the comments, do you think Bitcoin will ever replace the US dollar? Let's talk about it. See you in the next video.